Let's get our first perspective now. So we're going to hear how things are done in Scotland. Please welcome Chief Executive of Transport Scotland, Roy Brannen.
Good morning, thanks Richard. Great to be here this year. We didn't get an invite last year. I think that was probably mainly because it was the first year, but I think if you want a balance in terms of what's going on in the UK, then certainly having the three devolveds here will hopefully give you that. So the three of us have had a chat well in advance of this just to try and present in a fairly similar manner. So we're going to cover some of the how we governed, what's the asset, what are the major projects on the go at the current time, innovations and some of the challenges. So you should start to see some of the themes that are flowing across each of the three Celtic nations. The picture behind me is 2 or 3 bridges that we have up in the Forth at the minute. So some of you might be familiar with the Queensferry crossing, and I was recollecting this morning with Derek over my first year in post. This time last year, I had a broken bridge, or very close to it, and spent the next 3 weeks trying to get that bridge back into operation. And it's only when you go through something as severe as that that you understand the value of the assets to the economy, and hopefully I'll cover some of that today. So, slightly unique in the terms of the speakers that you've heard so far. As Chief Executive of Transport Scotland, I cover not just roads, but all modes. So from canals, from ferries, aviation, rail, road, cycling, walking, and everything in between. So as an organisation, we spend about $2 billion in a year. We've got a very lean organisation, so only 480 staff who deliver that $2 billion in a year. We focus on all of those modes as they are all connected across the whole of Scotland. And one of the key things that Patricia mentioned this morning around integration is absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to do in Transport Scotland. And when you see the geography of our makeup, hopefully that's come up clear enough, you'll understand why the ministers created an organisation like Transport Scotland. Every single part of the country is connected by either rail or road, or by ferry, road and rail. And that's really, really important because there's a large percentage of our population who don't live in the 7 cities in Scotland. So at the minute we've got about 2.6 million of us living in the 7 cities, so 51% of the population, and that's about 58% of the labour force. But the remainder of that is in quite a remote part of the UK, in the Highlands of Scotland and on the Western Isles and on the islands themselves, of which there are about 92 inhabited, out of 790. About 100,000 people live in islands, and it's really important when you understand the key growth sectors in Scotland why they are absolutely intrinsically linked to the trunk road network and all the way down and across the border to England. The picture that you see there, it shows the trunk road network. So that's the area that I'm responsible for. So very similar to Jim's, 6%, slightly higher than Jim's actually. His was 2%. A third of all traffic, 2/3 of all HGV traffic. So a great deal of the raw product that comes in and the goods that go out will flow on the trunk road network. Every airport was within 5 miles of the trunk road network, and as I say, every ferry port and port is connected to the trunk road network. But we can't look at that in isolation. It's very important that we take cognizance of the local road network, of which makes the remainder 52,000 kilometres. So we work very closely with our local authority colleagues, 32, and we have a road advisory board, a strategic action group, moving on the recommendations from the National Roads Maintenance Review that occurred back in 2011, and that's all about trying to get maximising the value of collaboration. And a couple of my colleagues in the audience today, if you want to pick up on any of that, they will be around for the next 2 days. But it's a slightly different approach again from what you'll hear from Andrew and from Sheena, but very much a collaborative approach to running our holistic road network. An interesting fact there just at the end is the freight lifted by road, 138 million tonne. And as I look after rails as well, we only shift around about 9 million on the rail network, and I think that gap will always remain fairly significant for a number of different reasons, for pathways, for access, but the road by far is the biggest mover of raw product in and out of the country. For the supply chain, give you some idea of the kind of materials that we use and the assets that we own. So 1,900 structures, 9 long-span bridges, truly long-span bridges, and a lot of them are over 40 years old now, and the Forth Road Bridge that failed last year just reached its 50th birthday. It shouldn't have failed. But, you know, bridges of that era need more tender love and care, and I think that's what we're going to see much more as we go forward in terms of our asset management plans. We have a very strong asset management approach. The team worked very hard to embed asset management, not just within our culture, but also within the supply chain. We have a shared integrated roads infrastructure system with Wales, so that's quite a unique system that we've set up to try and ensure that we get best value of collecting data, analysing data, and then using it to prioritise where we invest our money and our trunk road assets. But it's really about the growth sectors in Scotland and the fundamental proposal in the programme for government to create a more prosperous, fairer and a more participative society. And this is the First Minister's real focus, is growing a sustainable, inclusive economy. And for us in Scotland, our growth sectors are around about 6 of them that really, really matter. And I'll talk about a few of them. Food and drink, you will be familiar with, our Scottish produce, our whisky. If you look at all the Isla whiskies, so your Bowmores, your Bruichladdich, your Lagavulins, your Taliskers, all of them will come out by ferry boat off Isla onto the 83 and then onwards to the markets of USA, France, Singapore and beyond. If I lose part of that network, if the ferry for some reason isn't operative, then that impacts on that product. And we've engaged with Diageo recently just to understand better their supply chain. And usually in a bottle of whiskey, it's about 9 different legs of transport connectivity to get it produced and then to get it out to the markets. And the same thing occurs with food. Salmon, Scottish Salmon Company, biggest producer of salmon in Scotland. Most of it's on the west coast in the Outer Hebrides. All of that product has to come from those islands onto the mainland, transported to the airlines, and then wet fish is worth more than frozen fish. Over to the restaurants within 24 hours. And that's a huge logistics operation. And again, it's really important that our networks operate really efficiently. £31 billion of value to the Scottish economy of these growth sectors. Other emerging sectors that perhaps some people haven't been familiar with in terms of Scotland's position is life sciences and renewables. We move a lot of different components to all the remote renewable sites across Scotland, and that again requires all of our road network, not just the trunk road network, but also the local road network to work really efficiently. So a really important part of the economy is the growth sectors. Part of that is around tourism. We've done a lot of work with Visit Scotland in understanding what tourists want, where they go, how much they spend when they get here, and that's worth about £4 billion to the Scottish economy. And a large proportion of tourists, when they enter the UK, travel up to Scotland, will head towards the Highlands and the Cairngorms. They want to see the castles, they want to see the geography, they want to see the landscape. And again, the only way to do that is through our 3 routes, the 82 on the west, the A9 in the centre, or the A90 on the east coast. And they are absolutely pivotal to actually grow that part of the economy, the tourism sector. But also that goes with that is around event management. And we've had a very successful foray into that in 2014, hosting the Ryder Cup at Glen Eagles and the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. So much so that we've now got the Solheim Cup coming back in 2019 and the European Championships in Glasgow back in 2018. And that puts a huge strain on the whole of the transport network, not just the road network, but again, making that work holistically is a really important part of what we do in Scotland. And we use that experience not just in Scotland or the rest of the UK, but more widely to share that with other countries that are about to go into the same kind of arena in terms of event management. So a huge part of our economy. What are we up to just now? On the left-hand side is the Queensferry Crossing. We won a Guinness Book of Records, world record for the longest single-spanned cantilevered bridge in the world until we closed it. So it was only there for a matter of weeks, but 644 metres is the largest single-span cantilever ever built in the world. A phenomenal feat, and when you were standing on it, and the thing going up by a metre and a bit was quite an experience. But that's a really important part of our infrastructure, and will bring a huge amount of resilience to the East Coast, but also provide us with additional protection that we've not had before. Wind protection built into that bridge to ensure that we have it closed to high-sided vehicles on a much more infrequent basis. Moving around, we have the Aberdeen West to Peripheral, longest new road being built in the UK at the minute, 52 kilometres, £750 million. We'll take all that congested traffic out of the centre of Aberdeen and bypass it around up the A96 between Aberdeen and Inverness. And the North East needs that just now with the current state of the oil and gas sector. We really need to get that infrastructure in place and up and running to allow some economic growth to start to rebuild itself within the North East. Bottom right, A9, probably for the supply chain, probably the single biggest thing that you'll see in the next 9 years in Scotland. The complete upgrading the A9 to dual carriageway, £3 billion scheme, 12 sections. The first section is underway just now at Kincraig Dalradi, and the other 11 will start to come forward once we get through the statutory procedures. And then on the bottom left, another scheme underway just now, M8, 73, 74 around Glasgow, completing the Glasgow box as we call it. £500 million worth of investment due to open in spring, and will take about 30% of the journey time delays out of the system once it's complete. And the other important thing that's been signalled this year by our new Transport Minister, Mr. Youssef, is a refresh of the National Transport Strategy and the Strategic Transport Projects Review. So this is really about the future. This is about looking ahead. We've been building for the last few years, coming out of recession. We're now going into strategy and planning mode to try and predict what we need for the next 10, 20 years and beyond. And that will be a fairly chunky piece of work involving the whole of Scotland to try and shape the future of transport and its involvement in growing the economy over the next 20 years. On innovations, we've got a strong track record in Scotland, again, working with others across the UK and the rest around the world through the World Roads Association in bringing forward innovation. And I've just listed a few of them there. On the left-hand top corner, solar studs that operate on a particular congested junction in Scotland, which activate when that signal is green. So lane delineation, it's won 4 awards over the course of the last year. Fairly simple, but actually has a massive improvement to short-term interventions to try and improve the efficiency of the network. Alpine netting, we get a lot of landslides in Scotland. The Rest Me Thankful, which is the whisky route, suffers for that, and we've put in a lot of investment and time and energy into both understanding when landslides occur, but also trying to protect the network when they do occur using alpine netting. Average speed cameras, longest average speed camera in the UK at the current time, over 100 miles of average speed cameras. We had a huge campaign against that scheme as it went in, but the figures bear it out that it was the right thing to do. We have had probably four people saved from dying over the course of the last 18 months. We've got a 60% reduction in accidents across the length of that network, and a much more pleasant experience driving up the A9 as we start to build in the new dual carriageways. And then I've talked a bit about the wind barriers on the new bridge, sort of future-proofing the new bridge. And then the bottom line is all about winter preparedness. We had a very difficult time in 2010, 2011, and from there we built our resilience up quite significantly, buying these icebreakers from Finland. Never needed them since. We've moved into a different territory now with winter, much more flooding, much more high winds, but you'll never know when you need to be back prepared to deal with the severest of the winter, and therefore we don't take our eye off the ball in terms of how we set ourselves up. And the brine trials is a good example of that, trying to understand whether brine gives us a better advantage in some of our high altitude routes to normal salt production. And some of the challenges, I think for me, some of the challenges as Chief Executive of the agency is, particularly around roads, around climate change, both adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation, we have a fairly remote network that's vulnerable. The geography and the topography of our land means that we do get impacted quite severely when severe floods hit. We had 11 last year. If you remember, Abigail had already occurred in the start of November, and it finished with Kate. For those that are interested, the first one to occur this year will be named Angus. I don't know why the Met Office picked a Scottish name, but it's not here yet. But you can be pretty sure that those, when they do hit, will have a major impact. We all remember Desmond and Frank, and that hit the northeast fairly significantly for us. So it's all about learning lessons and trying to be prepared for that. Road safety, we've got the lowest accident stats on record since we've been gathering them. 168 people killed in the last year. That's still one too many, so we need to work harder to try and see if we can bring that down. So road safety is a key focus for me. And then technology, autonomous vehicles and technology going forward. What will the future hold? And it's interesting to see all the car manufacturers now starting to position themselves for the next decade and beyond. Audi reckon that by the 2025, 25% of their fleet will be electric. You've heard Elon Musk announce that the Model 3 will be available to the masses at $35,000. You can reserve it for $1,000 just now, and by 2019 you should start to see that hitting the ground. We've got one of the biggest connected recharging networks in Europe at the minute, 1,200 points. You can go across the whole of Scotland, and there is a charging point within 50 miles off the nearest charging point. And the bulk of them are fast chargers. And that's been a real boost for some of the, again, remoter parts of Scotland. If those of you are familiar with one of our iconic routes, North Coast 500, the Route 66 of the north, that was recently traversed by an electric vehicle, which is a pretty remote part of the country, I have to say. And that was a great achievement for those that are bringing forward the work around low-carbon vehicle and technology. So a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I'm encouraged by the fact that we continue to talk as 4 nations around all of this. We continue to engage internationally with the World Roads Association and beyond to make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel. And the other point that Tracer made this morning about integration, that's a really key part of all my focus in Transport Scotland, is trying to make all those modes work stronger together. And one of the key focuses over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be around bus. Still moves the largest amount of people, but probably still not in a place where it needs to be, particularly in Scotland. I know for the rest of the UK, very similar. So with that, I shall finish there, and probably giving you lots to ask questions about afterwards. Thank you.